So, there's a guy out there named Nassim Taleb. Really smart. Got some wonderful stuff. The interesting book. Start over. So I want to put a word and an idea out. And I'm not a big idea guy anymore. But this one illuminates a perspective that I think is useful, and the word is antifragile. And an economist named Nassim Taleb, wrote about it, a whole book. It's a good read. But basically, the idea is that anything suitably complex, any system suitably complex, doesn't work the way we think systems often work, sort of, common sense wise, which is if you just sort of get everything out of its way and you allow it to function in ideal conditions, that will be the best way to make it work well. And it turns out that once you get complex enough, that systems need disturbance, that they begin to degrade when they're not given a varied environment to function in. I talk about this in optimization a little bit. I have another video about optimization and how when we will optimize for whatever we do normally, and if that's the same thing all the time, we optimize more and more deeply and more narrowly. We become more fragile because we're getting better and better at one very small thing and worse at variety and adaptability. You see this in athletic training and all kinds of things. Anyway, this is sort of the corollary and the healthy side of that, which is complex systems need variety. So it's important because we often look at stress and we look at, we have a very controlled environment nowadays. We control temperature, we control our diet, we can choose all these things, and we often choose a lot of consistency. I've eliminated all of these eliminated all of these microbes and, all these things, antibiotics, proper hygiene, which, about 50 to 75% of that's a good idea, but the last 25% or so, they're starting to realize not a good idea to be too clean. Causes problems. The body needs to be challenged. The psyche needs to be challenged. So antifragile is the name for something that improves its functioning, that benefits from being disturbed up to a point, of course. And there's a threshold beyond which then that often slips into trauma and things like that. But even that traumatic experience, having gone through and resolved, can end up strengthening and expanding the capacity of a system, of a person. So, yeah, antifragile. So if you want health and an expansive life and longevity and all of these things that people like, it actually ends up being a bit of old advice. If you don't use it, you lose it. If you don't use your adaptive capacity, if you don't use your ability to deal with things that you don't like, if you don't use your ability to roll with things a little bit, then you'll lose it. And it turns out that this is a basic fundamental property of anything suitably complex, particularly to be called life. There are other properties that life has, of course, too, many. But this is an important one. So when you're doing, say, something physical, it needs to vary. If you love yoga, great. Go for it. And throw other things in. Throw something in you would never imagine doing. Crawl around in the mud every once in a while. Play in a jungle gym. Go run a 5K. And prepare yourself a little bit, unless you've been preparing yourself for a long time, and then you get good enough that you can just go do stuff. And you can, because that capacity has been maintained. And that sort of variety, that sort of pushing edges, stepping out just beyond where we're comfortable, is an incredibly healthy thing, especially when it's done in the spirit of play. It's light. It doesn't matter if we're good or not. That's not the point. The point is to enjoy the experience. I talk about sort of how to learn, how to learn from experiences and how to take them in the learning video. But the spirit of play, the details are not a big deal. But mix it up. I'm not a huge fan of, if you're afraid of something, go do it. Why would I want to maximize that? And that usually means, too, that we're kind of gripped when we go into something. We're tense. We're not at our best. We're not allowing our full capacity. So I prefer a softer touch, a little more expansive story about why to do things that are a little uncomfortable. One that allows us to just take or leave, how it went, and fully absorb the experience to make the most use of it as something different, as something challenging, yet expanding. The more different ways you do stuff, if you want to be good at adapting, if you want to be resilient, if you want to be able to take what comes, because there are many things that we choose. And in the big picture, you could say that, we choose everything. But for the more mundane scope and perspective, you don't get to pick every experience in your life. So it's good to be able to be present and accepting of whatever comes. So, Antifragile. Hope it helps.